A reading from the Gospel according to Mark. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, "John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." But others said, "It's Elijah," and others yet still said, "It is a prophet like one of the prophets of old." But when Herod heard of it, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, he has been raised." For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And Herodias had held a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and a holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" And she replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved. Yet, out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took the body and laid it in the tomb. I struggled, quite frankly, this week when I was thinking about what I might say about this passage. I struggled to find the good news that the gospel message that we're all seeking for in passages of Scripture. And let's face it, the beheading of John the Baptist really doesn't immediately present itself as a particularly helpful passage of Scripture, if that's your objective. It telling a tale of human misery, pride, shame, and murder. I did note and think that I could make comment on how it could be interpreted as a stern warning against the possible consequences of unchecked impulse. And whilst very few of us will ever become a powerful king, those same impulses born of insecurity, of pride, of shame and failure, those things that befell Herod, can just as equally, of course, be found in most of us. I also contemplated that perhaps the message we should take from this passage is one of affirming the possible costs of our discipleship, indeed the possible mortal costs of holding true to our integrity and faithfulness, them being the potential consequences of speaking truth to power, as John the Baptist had done when condemning Herod's marriage to his brother's wife. But when you think of it and look at this passage on its own, where is the good news? Well, initially, to be frank, that had me beat. I really couldn't see it. I did find it, but only upon reading the fuller chapter that this passage is from and resetting my own way of thinking. I have a spiritual director who is a wise and learned woman who helps me to unpick the sometimes confusing twists and turns that our lives can take. And she has a constant refrain for me that sprung to mind when I was thinking of and contemplating this passage. That phrase is, "Where do you think God is working in this?" And so I asked myself, where is God in this passage? I realised that in thinking about the passage from the perspective of Herod, or of John, or even of Herodias, that I was putting them in the centre of the story. The story then becomes about human beings, not about God. Now, the Gospel of Mark, the writer of it, has a common literary technique. You may recall a few weeks ago in the Gospel reading about Jairus and his daughter, how another story about the woman healed in the crowd by touching the hem of Jesus' cloak, that story is dropped into the middle of an existing narrative. Well, when I looked in the Bible, I discovered that that is exactly what we have here as well. Immediately before this story in a story, we have Jesus commissioning his apostles, sending them out 2 by 2, giving them power over evil spirits and instructing them on how they should approach their mission. And immediately after today's gospel reading, we have those same apostles returning, sharing the good news of all that they had done, presumably sharing in the joy of their successes in healing and driving out demons. The point is, they go out and they come back, God's mission being fulfilled in their midst, their faith giving them the power to resist the forces of evil. Good is being done. And yet, in the middle, there is this grim little tale of Herod, Herodias, and John. I think, therefore, that the message that what we should take from this is that whilst we may well have dark passages in our lives, where we might find despair, loneliness, injustice, sorrow, or even treachery, those dark passages are bracketed within and surrounded by God working wonders in the world around us. Before and after we stumble into the darkness, it is easy sometimes, perhaps we take it for granted, to be aware of God's presence in our lives. But sometimes when we are in the darkness, we fail to see him. He's always there, of course he is. It's just that we struggle to find him. I realised when thinking about it that this passage is the good news. It shows us that when we are at our lowest ebb, when we think that no hope can be found, that we can take confidence in the Christian promise that all will come good in the end. And that is, of course, the good news. As you may have heard me quote before, to summarise Julian of Norwich, that even when we are in the darkest places, all shall be well. All manner of things shall be well.